Right,
Hey.
so I'm going to introduce you to Isabelle here, and I'm going to literally hand over to her. So that's all from me.
Hi, everyone. Really nice to meet you. I'm Isabelle. Oh, I'm Isabelle Kermeen, and I work as communications manager at Integrity Action, which is an organization that supports citizens to demand integrity in the delivery of local projects and services. And I'll explain what that means as we go on. So today we're going to be looking at integrity in conservation project coordination and collaboration. And again, it will become clearer what this means. But essentially, how can we ensure that the various people engaged in different elements of the bigger picture of conservation uphold their promises and act with integrity? So I'm the communications manager for this organization, but I'm speaking here just on behalf of myself, not for the organization. And I'll go over what we do and how it might be applied to conservation a bit later. But just briefly about myself, I'm based in London, and the work we do is implemented through partner organizations in a few different countries in parts of Africa and Asia. And I've previously worked with different NGOs, including an environmental organization in Sri Lanka, and also on kind of youth empowerment and peace building, and with the UN, the humanitarian response in Sudan, and yeah, a few different things, an anti-corruption organization in Vienna as well. But I'd love to hear a little bit about everyone just before we start, if that's okay. So maybe everyone can just introduce yourself and where you are today and what you do when you're not attending this course. Something funny I wanted to put in there, your favorite thing to eat, and one thing that you've learned over the past few weeks about community-based conservation. So if you can't remember them all, that's fine. But would anyone like to start? Yeah, so where you are, what you do outside of the course, what you like to eat, and something you've learned during this course.
I'll go first. My name is Katrina Bracken, and I'm located in the United States in Colorado. And I am actually in corporate America, but trying to work my way into conservation, and because animals and conservation is more my passion than corporate America. It pays the bills, but not what I want to continue to do with my life. So, well, kind of it's a overall thing of like what's been, what I've been learning in the last few weeks is really just understanding and just having to continuously remind yourself that it takes time. It's not going to happen overnight. And you do have to be open to, modifying your strategy, which isn't always easy, for people in general. And sometimes it's not always easy for me. So it's definitely something that I would have to keep reminding myself. And then I forget, I think it was a lecture from last week, but talking about you can't just like, once you've committed yourself, you have to keep doing it. It's not something that you can just, it's not going to go away. Like the initiative or the issue that you're working, it's always going to be there. So you just have to keep working at it. And I think some people may get tired or frustrated and they may just stop. And so that's something that I think that I will have to constantly remind myself. And I think that was the questions.
Yeah, and something you like to eat.
Oh, right, pizza. I'm addicted to pizza.
Okay. Who wants to go next?
I'll go. I'm Lisa Weber, and I'm in Los Angeles. And I was in corporate America for 20 years and also did not want to do it. So I've made a switch to conservation, and I'm in the midst of applying to PhD programs. And what this solidified about what I'm hoping to study is really it's a combination of, psychology, policy, and conservation. And I'm really want to dig into how all those pieces like fit together to try to get better outcomes, because it's so challenging. And I just want to think of new ways, just understand more, how to approach it. Oh, I love pizza, of course. Everyone does.
Right.
Maya, go for it.
Okay. I'm Maya. I'm normally sitting in Switzerland. Now at the moment, overlanding a sort of in Croatia. I just finished my job career as, on one hand, community developer with my own business in Switzerland, and on the other hand, a teacher for special needs. So my future will be traveling, overlanding Africa, and I did a lot of volunteering with Wildlife Act and other organizations. It's a passion for me, and that's why I'm here. And I'm going to be in Botswana for 3 months with a German organization, Safe Wildlife Conservation. So this course came just perfect for me, even if it's a lot of work, Holly. I like nearly everything to eat.
That's a good answer.
Favorite? Braai.
Right, okay, very
Braai.
nice. Barbecue. Yeah.
Cornelia.
Hi, so I'm Cornelia Hiebrank. I'm from Germany. I actually did my first degree in biology, so I have a master's in animal behavior, and I wanted to work in research in that field, but everything was set up in England, and then Brexit happened, so I had to kind of find something else to do, and I couldn't find any position and had to find something to keep me afloat and just to make money. So I went into the second thing that I can do quite well, which is computer programming. So I currently work as a software engineer, and I'm doing a part-time master's on the side for actually having a degree in the field, and my master's thesis will be on identifying African wild dog individuals from camera traps through AI. So I'm trying to bring the two parts together, basically, and bring technology towards my conservation interest. And yeah, I found one thing that I learned to think more about in terms of community conservation is taking the time at the beginning to really listen to the community and understand what's actually going on, and trying to find out the underlying causes and not just the obvious issues. I think that that's something that I focused on a bit, maybe. And in terms of food, I'm going to go with pancakes.
Thank you. Very nice. Anne?
So I'm Anaïs, I'm from France. When I'm not following this course right now, I'm like looking for a job or doing part-time job that I don't really like, but I'm kind of stuck in France for now. I would like to work in great apes conservation, and I already volunteered for chimp sanctuary in Guinea, Cameroon, and a little bit in Gabon. And I took this course because I think that usually when we talk about conservation, we don't talk much about communities. So I was really glad that to finally see something about that. And well, my favorite food is, well, right now I'm obsessed with flatbreads with avocado and tomato sauce.
Nice. Great. Well, Holly, I guess everyone knows who you are, but what's your favorite food?
Well, no, I'm going to put that back as a question. So, pineapple on your pizza or not, and pancakes or crepes?
Okay, no pineapple at all.
Yes, pineapple. Sorry, Katrina, we can't be friends anymore. And I think crepes, not pancakes. So not the American
I agree.
fat, small,
Yeah.
the thin French with lemon and sugar.
Oh yeah, crepes are good. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I was going for German pancakes, but that's okay. We're in the middle between the
Yeah, no,
so.
Cornelia, we don't have such a thing as German pancakes. They
We
don't
do.
exist.
They're like Swedish pancakes.
Oh no, Isabel, we don't have Swedish pancakes. Either English or American. They're the only two countries in the world.
Oh dear. Okay. So I'm going to say Sri Lankan food because I just love it. And I spent some time there and it's just delicious. And they have a kind of flatbread, which is made with coconut, which is just delicious. So, okay, great. So sorry that just thought we'd start off with something like that. So thanks everyone. Let's get started with the workshop. So I really want this to be kind of interactive and open. So please feel free to speak up and ask questions. And also if you've got any examples you want to share, I'll be sharing some examples and some of them are not really directly related to conservation, but I think they'll still be interesting and you can start to get ideas of how there are ways to apply it, apply what we're going to talk about here. And yeah, so I will be bringing kind of international development and integrity building or anti-corruption angle to this interdisciplinary course. So I think you have already had some materials for this module, which relate to kind of what corruption is and what it means for conservation. So I just thought we could start off with a little bit of that. And if it's stuff you've already covered, then we can just go through it quite quickly. But yeah, basically, the starting point is that there's a kind of fundamental need to take into account human behavior when we consider corruption, not corruption, well, yeah, corruption, but conservation is what I was going to say. And that's something we've already touched upon. So communities, but also other local actors like a local government, for example, have the potential to support and promote corruption, conservation, but obviously also to hinder it. And so, yeah, it might sound basic, but the reality is a bit more complex. So today we're going to look a bit about enabling communities to understand the importance of their role and understand the benefits for the community and for the future, and also working with accountable stakeholders who have the potential to support or disrupt conservation, and to ensure collaboration for conservation can be approached in a constructive way. And poverty and living conditions are obviously a clear driver in many communities who use local resources for their own gain in a way that could be destructive. So if people can't really put food on the table, they'll obviously try to use what's around them to help them to earn and provide for their families. And obviously this can be short-sighted, focusing kind of short-term benefits and not thinking about the long-term potential detriment. So because of that, of course, education and awareness are really important. So when it comes to corruption and anti-corruption work, you know, corruption has a very broad definition. It's not just bribes. And I know you've already read a bit about this, like I said, so we'll keep it brief. People don't always agree about defining corruption. There are lots of definitions and there's lots of arguments and people who spend their whole career doing this. But I just thought we'd open it up and have a quick kind of brainstorm on the different types of corruption we might come across. And I was going to write down the examples on a board that I'm going to share. So I'm just going to quickly share my screen. So can you see that?
We can see it, but we can't see anything on it yet.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah.
So would anyone like to share an example of corruption?
Let's start with bribe taking.
Bribes.
Oh, we can see it now.
Yeah, great.
I want to cross the border and I don't have all my papers. So I have some money in my pocket.
Yeah. So we could call that facilitation. We can call that a facilitation payment. You're paying for something that you should be given, but that you have to pay for instead of just being given it. Any more?
If you have family that wants to do something and you're in a position to allow them to do it, and you allow them to do something that they might not actually be allowed to do just because they're your family or friends.
So maybe like nepotism or favoritism. Yeah.
Yeah, I see that a lot in corporate America.
Well, let's get on to the trumps. Oh no, hold on. Sorry, this is corruption. Oh no, that's very viable.
Any other examples?
Well, extortion.
Yeah. Yeah. So forcing someone to do something with a threat if they don't do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What about just turning a blind eye? Just not looking, not partaking, but not, you know, turning it in.
Allowing something to happen where you could have tried to speak up. Yeah.
So remaining silent.
Yeah, so you see something that's being done that's not right or that's illegal, but you don't report it. So you're not actually actively involved in it, but you just.
So, and what about kind of lubricating the system? Even though you might not be gaining anything, you lubricate it because it might be a favor for you down the line.
Sorry, Holly, what do you mean by that?
Like sort of making the actual ability to be corrupt easier. So actively allowing something, not because you're gaining from it, but because you want a favor later down the line.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, and I guess you might have heard of sextortion, which sounds like something that might not happen in conservation, but I think it probably.
Oh, I know absolutely does. But I've never heard it mentioned as that word.
Yeah, that's a word. So basically forcing someone to do a sexual act in return for not. So for example, a manager might force a junior staff to perform a sexual act, and if not, they might sack them. They might lose their job.
Mm-hmm.
What about embezzlement?
Embezzlement, yeah.
Yeah, that's what I was just going to say.
Yeah. Okay, I've got a couple which are less.
Fraud.
Fraud, yeah. I've got a couple which are perhaps less spoken about, but which also happen. So there's something called ghost workers. Has anyone heard of that?
Oh, that's big here. I never even thought of that, but in conservation, that's big.
So basically, they exist on paper and the project pays money, but actually they don't exist in real life. So the money is just going to someone's pocket. So it's a way to steal money from a funded project. And then this one also might sound a bit vague, but it happens and it can be seen as a type of corruption. It's rushed spending. So if you have a project that's coming to the end of its life and you need to report to the donor and you've got all this money you need to spend, you might end up spending it on what you hadn't originally planned or paying more than you should because you're just in a rush to do it. And that could be seen as a more kind of passive type of corruption, but it's misuse of funds on the basis of what they were supposed to be used for. And then the last one I was going to mention is called double dipping. So double dipping it sounds a bit dodgy. Well, it is dodgy. It's if you have, for instance, you claim to the donor or to whatever funds the funding is for the project twice. So you might buy a laptop and you might say to this donor, oh, I paid for this laptop $500. And then you might tell the other donor, oh, this laptop, which is the same laptop, I need $500 for it. So it's like, yeah, it's a way to get extra money for something you haven't really bought. Anyway, the main point of this little exercise was just to demonstrate the breadth of types of corruption, and these types of corruption do occur, and they do occur in conservation. And so we can broadly define it as the abuse or misuse of entrusted power or public office for private gain and absence of a strong state or lack of order. So I think you've already got that definition in your papers. So it could be money or other benefits which support an individual, and it's basically an exploitation of a power imbalance. And of course, areas of high biodiversity with important ecologies may also be areas which are politically unstable or economically unstable. And we can broadly say that that is the case in much or parts of Africa. So where poverty is high and incomes are low, and also where governance systems or structures might not be that strong, payments and different types of corruption like this can be attractive, basically. So I thought we could do a quick brainstorm on the types of corruption that could be found in conservation. And these things that we've mentioned can apply to conservation. So perhaps we could just give some examples more specifically. So when we talked about facilitation payments, that could be because you need to access an area of conservation importance, but it's also perhaps across a border or in a conflict zone, so that maybe there are guards or checkpoints. So this is like accessing.
So I did mention on the last Zoom chat that we had, which I found absolutely astounding, that I actually had confirmation from somebody that if a hunter wants to go into an area, especially DRC, where they're fighting, there are certain hunting organizations that are in connection with the rebel groups, and they will send money to that group to stop fighting for those 3 days. They'll fly in with their hunter who will get the trophy and fly out, and the fighting continues. That's facilitation payment.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Shocking.
Yeah, I never would have thought of that.
Yeah.
Okay.
When it comes to bribes, any ideas of what might happen?
Well, if you're wanting your initiative to kind of take off, so to speak, or be successful, you could be bribing either an individual or the community for whether it's giving money or something else that they need for them to back or agree with what it is that you're trying to do, and promote it and allow it within a community, I guess is what I think that's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, exactly. Bribing individuals or communities with money or goods so they support or allow something illegal. So
what about
telling them that you're going to put money towards building a local school if they let you cut down the trees?
Yeah.
So I'm going to muddy the waters here, Isabelle, a bit. Okay, let's take an example where an organization asks a community or a country to do something that they consider to be the right thing, right? But it's not outwardly among the scientific community. And remember, we're supporting scientific conservation here, not emotional conservation. And the scientific community doesn't agree with it, but that company has given a gift to the country or the group to do something, then is that a bribe? Would you consider that a bribe?
Yes.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, I mean, because they're, some people are relying more on the science. And so if they're promoting the science and saying that this is, what it means, and we have this information to back it up, then yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, so it could be, sorry.
No, I think that's where you start getting into different definitions of corruption. I think different countries can see it different ways. Like I think about China, which is a lot of what this is, and they might consider that to be wrong.
Yeah, exactly. So there might be certain social norms, local norms, traditional behaviors which are detrimental for conservation, but which are locally accepted in a certain country or community. Yeah.
Now, sextortion is one of the things that might affect your number of female game scouts or female working in the field. And that's why it's quite popular at the moment to create all female anti-poaching teams.
Oh, wow. So they create them so that they can abuse them.
No, they create the
Oh,
teams so that they're just women, so they don't have to go through sextortion.
Oh, I see. Okay.
So
Oh, so it's an avoidance tactic. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. A way to
okay.
protect them.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So, and then another example could be, say, in a certain type of conservation, you're allowed to, perhaps to maintain the forest, you're allowed to cut down a certain amount of trees for the health of the forest, but you actually turn a blind eye to, you know, cutting down more than is necessary in order to, yeah, if you get some benefit out of it.
And that definitely happens in the hunting industry, where you're given a quota. So you can take 4 leopards a year from this area, but what they do is they take 5 leopards and they bury the rest of them. You know, they bury the one they're not supposed to have, and burying the animal is very common so that it's not found.
Yeah. Okay. I think as we go throughout the rest of the workshop, we'll come up with other examples as well. So I might leave it at that for now. And then I'm just going to show you, let's see if we can do this. So here we go. We don't need the cover slide. Oh, let me just change this screen, sorry. Okay. Great. So what we're going to go through today are these main areas. So we're going to be looking at community-centered accountability, which is what my organization does. And, sorry, juggling. Yeah, basically. And this can be broken down into stakeholder engagement, committees or task teams, access to information, inclusion, advocacy and awareness, sustainability and safety. So they're the main topics we're going to cover. And I can see we've already gone through half an hour, so we're going to keep things moving. And I'm going to, first of all, briefly tell you what my organization does to give some understanding of that. So I'm going to show you a quick video, and hopefully the sound works. If it starts.
Isabelle, did you click share sound when you press share screen? Because if you didn't, you have to share screen again.
Oh, okay.
So
I'll do that then.
And then when you say share screen, before you click OK, there's a little tick button.
Oh, yeah. Well done. Thank you. You're more technical than me, obviously. Okay. So if it's jumpy or slow or you don't get the sound, just wave. And I can, I could possibly share it with you to watch later. But I just thought we'll try and watch it quickly. It's just 90 seconds long.
Can hear it.
We all need decent education, healthcare, roads, clean water, and buildings that last. But in many places, they are too often promised and not delivered. Integrity Action is changing this. Citizens monitor vital services or development projects in their community. They compare what's promised with what's delivered. Problems are reported using the Development Check mobile app and displayed publicly, online, in real time, building pressure for a solution. Citizens work with those responsible for fixing problems, and when a problem is solved, this goes public too. We have applied this to essential public services and international development projects, working with partner organizations, large and small, and a diverse range of citizens. We ensure people have the power to make things work. And we build trust between communities and those who serve them.
Okay. Oh no, sorry. Thank you for watching that. So yeah, obviously, as I said, the actual video and the work we do is not used that much in specific conservation settings at the moment, but I do have some examples of where the monitoring that takes place has contributed to natural resource related outcomes. But yeah, basically we support local organizations that are already active in the communities we serve. So it's really important to have to be working with any organizations that are already in the communities, and then they can work closely with the people who live in these communities. So they're called citizen monitors, and they're not experts in, if you're monitoring construction of a school, for example, they're not experts in construction, they're not engineers, but they are trained and engaged in monitoring how things are done. And they use this mobile app where they report problems, and then they work with those responsible to get it fixed. And basically it's an approach called social accountability. And social accountability can be applied in different settings, and it can be applied in conservation. So
I have a question.
yes, yeah.
Oh, I had a question. Is it anonymous, or are they, when they are reporting, is it attached to a person? Like, is there any danger to a person if they?
Very good question. So the approach is designed to be kind of collaborative and very open from the beginning. So at the beginning of monitoring, the approach taken is that it's not kind of like a watchdog, secret monitoring, checking what's happening. It's all very open, and we have to do it that way because you have to engage with, it could be the local authorities or whoever's implementing the project or funding it. They have to engage with them from the beginning, so they have to be on board that the monitoring is taking place, and so it's not done anonymously or anything like that. But when the problems are reported in the app, the data it's not possible to identify who reported it by anyone else who might wish them harm or anything. But basically the community members, they would anyway, if they're using the app. Sometimes they don't use the app, but if they're using the app, we tend to find that actually having an app and documenting what's happening on the app and taking photos and then going and showing it actually lends them credibility with, say, the local government or whoever they're trying to work with to get problems fixed, because they can kind of stand there and say, hey, you know, we're monitoring this is being done officially, we've found this, we can show you what we found, and because they've given some kind of credibility, and it makes it a bit more official, that can help. So, but we all are going to talk about safety and security as well, because that's really important. Obviously, if someone's reporting something that's wrong, there could be a risk to them. Yeah, thank you. Good question. Another question?
Yes, please. Someone is promising something, but the message is made by the one who gets it. So maybe the people in the community just heard it wrong or take another message than I want to send. What happens then?
Yeah, so when we talk about looking at promises, the way this is done is by, as part of the process, first of all, looking at any documentation relating to what's supposed to be done. So in terms of conservation, that could be looking at any local laws or even international laws on what's allowed and what's not allowed, whether it's cutting a certain type of plant or tree, or poaching or whatever it might be. Is this something that's allowed? Is there a restriction on, as Holly was talking about before, like quota for how much is allowed in a certain period? And then taking that and then going and seeing what's actually happening. So of course it can be difficult to compare what's being promised with what's actually happening if it's over a long time period, or if some things take place that you don't know about. So that's just something to bear in mind. But the point of kind of checking what's happening against what's supposed to happen is there's a strong element that you need to have access to any documentation about what has been promised. So in terms of conservation, there could be a local conservation initiative which is taking place according to a project plan. And the project plan would have been hopefully developed with the community and other local stakeholders, and it would have been agreed, and it would be kind of documented as you go along. So you would firstly need, one of the first steps is to get everyone on board, that they know that the kind of checking, the monitoring is taking place, but also making sure you have something to compare it with. And in fact, in Africa, there are, and we'll get onto this, there are a lot of laws around access to information and citizens being able to, being able to go to the local government and say, okay, we want to get this project document or this local law. We want a copy of it because we want to check. And even, unfortunately, even getting that kind of documentation can be an uphill struggle, but it's a crucial part of it, because you can't try to hold someone to account if you don't firstly know what's supposed to be taking place. Does that answer your question? I understood. Yeah, okay.
And do you put the parameters in the app for each project?
Yeah, exactly. There's a way to do that. And also you can have them in your hand. You can, if you're able to get copies or electronic copies, you can also take them with you. I mean, if it's, in some cases it could be a lot of documentation, so it would also be quite involved, but yeah. So, okay, so moving on, and let's breaking it down into different steps. Let's talk about engaging, the first step, which is engaging with key stakeholders. So we talk about the importance of engaging with local actors, and I think this has also been covered in some of your reading in your documents that you've got. But why could it be really important to engage with local actors? Any quick ideas?
Isabelle, I think you have to call out people's names to answer you.
Okay. Yeah, Lisa, you were going to say something.
Oh, well, I think you first, it's just part of the research process of understanding what everyone's needs and wants are, and then coming to, agreement that everyone can support.
Yeah, exactly. Katrina, did you want to say something? No, that's fine. Okay.
I'm okay right now.
Okay, yeah, sorry. Okay. Yeah, so understanding needs, understanding the different people involved, also building trust, getting to know who's active in the local area means you will have an understanding of how things work, of who's responsible for what, and also who could be the different stakeholders that you might need to target, because it might not be clear from the beginning, or you might need to get different levels, different people involved. You need to build relationships. So from the beginning, it's essential to build a good relationship with, so it could be the local authorities and decision makers. It could be other organizations that are working in conservation. It could be donor organizations who you need support from if there's a specific project going on. And keeping in touch with them is important. And the relationship, if the work continues in a constructive way, the relationship will probably become mutually beneficial through as time goes on, because the stakeholders that you're engaging with might realize that it's helpful to have you on the ground if you're doing monitoring, because they might not be able to go out and do checks on a regular basis. They're probably got a lot on their plate as well. So it can lead to a relationship where the communities turn to the authorities for support and to push things through or to fix things. But actually the authorities might also turn to the communities for regular updates, to say, hey, can you check this today because it was supposed to be delivered last week, or it didn't happen, or whatever. So the conservationists or community members might become like the eyes and ears on the ground of what's really happening. Conservation could be taking place in a really large area, so they might just not have time to go and visit all the different areas that are being protected, or where work is going on. So obviously at the moment, or at least in some places, COVID has made this harder, because it might be harder from the beginning to build and keep up these relationships with the local authorities, or whoever could be the person you turn to get problems fixed. Because if there are restrictions in place around movement, you might not be able to turn up to the local councillor and knock on their door and say, hey, what you said this was going to be done last week, but it hasn't. What can we do? You might need to call them, and that could be harder because they might just not pick up the phone. So it's just something to bear in mind. But I think in general, just the relationship building at the beginning is really important, and understanding who does what, who's responsible for what, who can you target. You know, there could be one government office where, you know, there's an individual who's responsible for something and they're a problematic individual. They're known for cutting corners or they're known for taking bribes. But there might be someone else in the office who is more open to collaborating, to listening, to supporting your work. So it also is, you know, a process of understanding who are the right people in any given organization or body or office to kind of try and build relationships with. And of course, yeah, please.
Oh, sorry. No, I was just going to say it's also, it helps with keeping people accountable for, you know, their tasks, or it also helps for you to understand if somebody who was tasked with something and they're not following through, then, you know, you need to start thinking of an alternative or a different individual to kind of put in that role that, you know, to help.
Yeah, definitely. Exactly. So, great. Okay. So, and as I said before, in this approach, at least, the monitoring or the checking of what's happening isn't like a watchdog mechanism, but it has to be kind of collaborative, open from the beginning, constructive, and with the support and approval of all the key people. So that's just something to bear in mind from the beginning and work towards that. Holly.
I just want to really highlight that word watchdog, because across Africa, it's one thing that people hate. So you've really got to set up your monitoring. No, not so much
the concept.
Yeah, the concept. So you've really got to set up your monitoring so that it's not as if you're a teacher checking your students are doing well. You know, it's really got to be that collaboration. And if you can get them to police themselves, it's way better than you coming in as an outside entity and trying to create a method of policing or watchdogging, because it just doesn't work. And you will find, you know, we've spoken about power dynamics. You will find that there are community members who are going to be able to keep control of things and play that watchdog line better than you can.
Yeah, exactly, because they're from the community, they know the local context. It's in their interest to for things to work in their village or their area, so there's less suspicion. You know, they're local, they're from the area, they know what's happening. There'll be less suspicion of them than there is of even perhaps of a conservation organization or an international group or whoever it might be coming in. Yeah. Okay, great. And that I'm going to move on to another element of the approach, which is having some kind of structure in place that brings the different stakeholders together. So this could be called different things in different settings, and it could be an entity or structure that exists, or it could be something that you could work towards setting up. So different terms might be there. So there might be a village natural resource committee, and also it doesn't have to be a village, it could be you know, district or whatever area. But yeah, it could be a village natural resource committee, a village management committee. So if it's a village management committee, their focus might not be on natural resources or on conservation, but they could be working on health and water and education and all kinds of things. But you could find a way to integrate conservation or natural resource management into it. It could be called a task team, or like a multi-agency or multi-stakeholder task team. And in the approach that Integrity Action does, we call it a joint working group, which sounds a bit jargony, but it kind of does what it says on the packet. So joint working group, it's a group where different stakeholders come together and work together on something. So I guess some of you have been you know, volunteering or working in different settings where there's an element of protecting wildlife. So has anyone come across any groups like that? Any like structures like that? Holly, have you come across anything like that? Like a village management committee?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they exist in the traditional form with the elders. We check in on things, but we're obviously experiencing quite a sort of upshift with young people feeling like they have more power than the elders now because they've got new ways of doing things. So because of technology, that has caused an imbalance in that ability. But absolutely, people do come together. And I mean, you just look in any community here across Africa where water is a shortage. Somebody or a group of people have taken it upon themselves to organize who gets water when, and to make sure that the vulnerable do get water. And it does happen in that way, whether we see that from the outside or not. It is managed by a joint group.
Yeah, and I also think that in a lot of settings in Africa and in other places, there might be structures like this in place where it's kind of like local authority figures who are involved in this group, where decisions are made, plans are made, problems can be raised, but actually the community doesn't necessarily know about it or doesn't know how to participate. So they don't know when the meetings take place, they don't know if they can just show up, or the meetings might take place at a time or in a place that isn't accessible or that isn't easy to figure out. So when you're approaching conservation and you want to try and identify this kind of like platform or group, you might need to do a bit of research, you might need to do a bit of digging, you might need to go to the local municipal offices and just say, hey, is there a group like this? Are there any meetings? Who can attend? And then work with the community so the community understands this body exists, this structure exists, and you as community members can join. And then they might show up and then it's like, oh, we're discussing high level questions, or we're making decisions on behalf of everyone, and we've been told by the elders that we have to do it this way. And then a community member shows up and they're like, oh, but hang on, did you think about sharing the water with people who have reduced mobility and can't go from their home? And it might be quite hard for community members to speak up in a forum like that. First of all, they might not feel that people will listen to them. They might be shy. They might feel like they're going to be ignored, or they might just not know how they can speak up. So really kind of trying to understand how the structure works and trying to get information on what's going to be discussed at a certain meeting before going, because there could be all kinds of barriers to engaging in those groups. But if you're going to be doing a kind of monitoring approach, and from the beginning you know that the people you need to be targeting are going to be in that kind of meeting, then find a way to get into that and get engaged and preparing, just like trying to get any documents beforehand on what's being discussed at the different meetings, and then trying to make sure that there's either you kind of have a kind of consultation in the village first, so you can get different views from men and women, from elders, but also young people, from people perhaps with disabilities who might not be able to attend themselves, to get that understanding before then perhaps going as a spokesperson of the community to the meeting, and then engaging. Yeah.
And that's often one of the first costs of even setting up or working a group like this, is transportation costs for everybody to get to that initial meeting, consultation, or whatever you call it. And I can see Maya with that look on her face, which tells me, yeah, but how often does that actually work? I mean, really, you go to the municipal's office and you get that piece of paper? Well, you're right, but you have to keep trying. And there's this real discord between a traditional way of doing things and a Western business ideal. And the Western business ideal, sadly, is being pushed on all of these projects, often because your donor requires it. And I don't see any way around it. You've got to pitch up for your job if you're being paid a job. You can't do what traditionally you'd go off for a funeral for 5 days. So that's the kind of discord that is happening, that we have to work around with these type of groups.
It isn't easy in the Western world as well to do it participatory and in a good way.
Yeah, no, definitely. It's not going to be easy, but persistence is important. And I mean, in in my organization in Kenya specifically, we've been doing work with some groups in the coast of Kenya where they're monitoring things like water infrastructure and other types of infrastructure, so construction of schools or health centers. And it's taken time and taken a lot of effort, but actually we've got to a point where the people who are the monitors who are going to these meetings have become the go-to for the local authority representatives, and the relationship has been built. So it's not easy, it's not straightforward, and it takes a lot of time and effort, but it can happen. So yeah. Okay, great. So I'm going to talk a bit about access to information, which I think we covered a little bit already, but I'm just going to talk about that. Oh, Holly.
Just one more thing before you go on, Isabel. We usually have a 5-minute break. Is everything fine if we carry on? Or Isabel, do you want a break, or how's everyone feeling?
I'm flexible.
It looks like shaking heads means let's carry on, but you know, this is lack of communication here. All right, carry on.
Good, yeah.
If we need a break later on, we can take it if it's too much. And also, I have to say, I understand that I'm talking a lot, and I hope it's, you know, not too much. I'm trying to ask questions and get a bit of a discussion going wherever I can. So if you want to ask questions or add something or, you know, give an example, just jump in. So, okay, great. So access to information. So as we talked about, you firstly have to understand what the rules are or what the plan is, to make so that you can then check what's actually happening and see whether it's being done in the right way. And getting access to those documents can also be hard. So it could be a project plan, it could be local laws, it could be traditional laws or traditional rules as well, or it could even be like international treaties or international law. So first of all, getting the relationships in place, figuring out what the structures are, what the groups are where you can engage with people, and then also getting the information you need to be able to compare what's happening. And actually 22 countries in Africa have adopted access to information laws, but the implementation remains patchy. So that's where the problem is. So the local authorities, who are the ones who could share the plans or the blueprints or the whatever the documents are, they might not even know that they have a legal obligation to share those. So you might come across that. You might come across a few barriers along the way with getting access to what you need. But if you're looking at a conservation project that's going on, where it's perhaps donor funded, then it might be easier to get access to the project plans, because you might be able to work with the conservation organization and say to them, I'd like to help you monitor this, not to make sure people are doing their jobs properly and that the project's running as it should, but just to make sure, from a conservation point of view, from a mutual benefit point of view, and make them understand that what the work you want to do is it's constructive and it's going to support them and their work and their implementation. Okay. Then I wanted to talk a little bit about inclusion. So I don't know about the gender aspect of conservation, but as in many fields, it's quite often a kind of male-centric worldview that we have to deal with in different ways. So there could be the norm that conservation is it's more men that are involved in it, or only educated people or only experienced people. But if we're looking to change community attitudes and also the attitudes of key stakeholders, everyone needs to be involved. If you can get women involved, they, especially if you're looking at things like cutting trees, right? So who's going to be the one who's deciding how the kitchen runs and then where the firewood comes from? That would be perhaps it could be women in many settings. Or if you're looking at like pollutants being released into the waterways, it could be the women who are washing and then there's something chemicals that are in the water and then that gets released into the river. So we need to involve women in it, and we need to involve men in it, and we need to involve young people. As Holly was saying, young people are realizing that they can and should be involved more actively, but then there could be local traditional attitudes where it's the elders who are the ones who decide. So inclusion of young people is really important. So what I'm getting at here is, if you're going to be doing some kind of community monitoring, having people who are monitoring who are representative of the community is really important. Older people, if they're an elder, they might be able to be active and contribute and participate and make decisions more easily. But there could also be a lot of older people who are more vulnerable, who are perhaps homebound. But then you could also have older people who know about traditional methods and know about traditional approaches to conservation, right? So some of the traditional kind of norms and behaviors might be detrimental, but there could also be some that are positive and that can help with conservation efforts. So being able to involve different stakeholders from the community in conservation, but also in monitoring of what's happening is really important. And in the kind of volunteering or other like wildlife or conservation work that anyone here has done, have you come across involvement of marginalized groups or people, or does it tend to be forgotten? Does anyone have any insights?
No, I think in terms of women being a marginalised group, they're more and more in the anti-poaching teams and the monitoring teams, so that's definitely there. I think, in a way, poachers, and we've spoken about the word poachers being a bit of a misleading word, but they are in a sense marginalised. We need to include poachers because they're a stakeholder, whether we like it or not, they're stakeholders in our wildlife. So we need to include them in the planning, that they actually feel they can change things for the better so they stop poaching. Or, I hate to use that word, but it is a word that's sadly in our vernacular.
Yeah.
So, I mean,
Oh.
So is it, Holly, you had mentioned, is it the Lion Guardians? In
Samburu, Northern Kenya, Waso.
Yes, thank you. So kind of the same situation where they were able to work with them to get them to change how they viewed the wildlife. Is that kind of the same?
Absolutely. Yeah, and I mean, even if you start with poachers' wives to get them with an alternative income so they don't rely so much on their husbands bringing home, meat to sell. So those are marginalized, and there is a lot of focus in Zambia around Luangwa. There's a lot of, alternative livelihoods for poachers and their wives so that they don't get, shunned in Western society, because whether we like it or not, all of these people, yes, they live their traditional lives. Yes, they, we think of them sort of in their villages living their life, but they have access to every Hollywood film we do, and they want to be respected by the Western world, and that's the way it is.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay, good. So let's talk a bit about advocacy and awareness. So raising awareness can work on two levels. There's the impact of the work being done. So the impact of the conservation work that's going on, what that can mean for the local community in a short term, but also in a long term point of view. but then the second part of it is the importance of conservation. So again, coming back to the long-term point of view, what's being done, why is it important, what achievements are being made, and also why is it important in the first place. So if people are going to buy into this, they need to understand it better. So you also might have different audiences. So who needs to understand the work, and so who should we be targeting? So of course, the communities themselves need to be one of the audiences. They need to understand better why conservation is important for them. They need to be involved from the beginning. But then also, as Holly said, it could also be the people who are having detrimental impact on the natural environment. It could be the poachers, it could be the people who are cutting the trees, or it could be local authorities. It could be it could be a school that decides to cut down trees to make land for kids to have a play area, or they could be cutting down the wood for their kitchens to cook meals for kids. And it could even be, if there's a conservation project or organization, it could be the staff as well. Like, fine, that's their world, that's their bread and butter, so they know about it. But there could be other things that you need to raise awareness about. Yes, please, Maya.
It could be, or it should be.
Yeah. So it should be. I think you should aim to raise awareness with as many of these different groups as you can, because they all need to work together at the end of the day, or they're all part of the picture of who can have an impact and who can make a difference on what's being done. So, Holly, you're going to say something?
Yeah, I do. I wanted to just say I took on 3 days of work from another organization, and they were interviewing young, I think I mentioned this to you guys, youth. Now, one thing I don't think I had even realized, how many of these youth, now the youth interviewed were in Nigeria and Uganda, there were about 500 of them, and how many of them thought that advocacy was an actual job. Now, I don't know if you guys in the countries you live in would ever really think of that as an actual job description. I hadn't, and I haven't thought enough about advocacy. But if there are this many youth who think that they can change the world they live in by being advocates for that change, then maybe you need to harness this in youth.
Yeah, that's an interesting interesting comment. Yeah, I mean, advocacy is a job. Sorry to say that you're wrong, Holly.
I know it is, but I'm just going to move to make you all jealous. But Isabelle will keep going on, because I'm going to show you my background.
Okay. So yeah, an advocate could be someone who just does it because they care about it and it's important for them, and they do it in their free time. Or it could be someone whose actual job is to advocate on behalf of a cause or a group. There you go. There's the giraffe in the background.
There's actually 4 giraffes, but you can just see one baby and the zebra there.
Aww.
Amazing.
Is this Soisambo?
No, this is the new house. I've just moved here yesterday.
You need a roommate?
Yeah,
of course.
Or do you need 6 roommates?
I mean, I work remote now, so.
Yeah. Lovely. Yeah, so advocacy can be a job, or it could be something of a passion that you do in your free time as part of what you're doing. But also, you could also call it activism, right? Because it's it's doing something that you think is important and to create a change. So I was going to ask if anyone has any examples they've heard about or come across where there was a conservation success and how they raised awareness about that, or how awareness was raised about that.
There's the big one, guys, that I've told you several times, which I always come to as an example. Mercury in fish, and how that really changed the world's views of eating seafood. And that was a major win for a lot of conservation organizations.
So what was the work done to raise awareness?
Well, that mercury is in the water. It wasn't even entirely true, but basically they measured levels of mercury in seafood, and a lot of conservation organizations started broadcasting what the levels were and how unhealthy they were for you, and people shied away from eating seafood. This was kind of 15 years ago now, and it made a massive difference.
Yeah, so some kind of information campaign.
Yeah, exactly. It was an information campaign.
Yeah, and what about on a local level? What kind of things could be done to raise awareness on the importance of conservation or on a conservation success?
We were talking about how a lot of people in Africa listen to radio, so maybe you could broadcast it on a radio show or have some people over to talk about what worked for them.
Yeah, definitely. Radio is, in the African context, is really important, and you could you could interview people, and they talk about the success they've had or the problems they're having, and also you could interview project staff, you could interview rangers. One of our partner organizations has a regular radio slot, like twice a month, where they talk about what were the problems we found this month and what were the fixes and how's that impacting the community. So that's one way to raise awareness.
On top of radio, there's podcasts, and then of course there's other. Well, this would be a different strategy, but a documentary. I mean, blood lions. I don't think a lot of people knew about canned hunting until that came out. I mean, obviously that took a little bit longer to do versus a podcast or something, but so something like that.
Yeah,
and don't
definitely.
forget inspirational speakers, because they actually do make a difference.
Yeah.
I still think about the example Holly told us, that all the documentaries of David Attenborough haven't been translated to the indigenous or the local languages. So I think that could be jobs for local people to translate and to show them afterwards to these people, because even I think Lion King, I don't know if it's translated, but that would be great. Maybe we should look for funds for such basic things.
Yeah, exactly. Imagine if all the Attenborough documentaries, which show the incredible side of the natural world, could be seen by people who actually come from those places, translating them and having like screening events. But in terms of sharing stories like that, you could also, and podcasts, you could also think about, I know you might have limited penetration in like very rural communities or communities that don't have big access to internet, but you could consider doing social media campaigns, social media posts with little videos or with text and pictures, and then you would want to think about which language you're doing it in. And then in Africa, in some countries, they also have like little taxis or motorbikes where they go around with like a speaker on it, and they're broadcasting messages. There might be adverts, but there might be news, or there might be other messages. And even the drivers of the bikes could have like vests, and they have messaging on their vests.
And use the church, if you can partner with the church.
Yeah, exactly. Any local places of worship, church, information sessions at schools, speaking with kids, because if you get the kids involved, then they might go and tell their parents or their grandparents. They can act as a messenger and an advocate as well, if they get interested in nature and the natural world. And then obviously also if you have got some kind of local working group or community decision-making forum, you know, giving little presentations there to kind of update what's going on and what the successes have been.
And in fact, we spoke about the Sunshine Cinema. Something like the Sunshine Cinema is a fantastic way to spread news and information.
What's the Sunshine Cinema?
It is some friends of mine who run a solar-powered cinema screen off their Land Rover, and they drive across Africa once a year, putting on its HIV/AIDS awareness, and they do a lot of work with that. But they also show football games, so they get the crowd with the football game, and then they show everything else.
That's cool.
And I think it's also like, if you can piggyback off of something else that has been in the news, like I mean, this is not on a local level, but I think one of my favorites is, you know, in the US, you know, COVID, people didn't know what a pangolin was. And I think like COVID being attributed maybe to a pangolin, all of a sudden everyone's like, what's a pangolin? And then there was all the follow-up stories about a pangolin, and now people actually know what a pangolin is and that it's endangered. You know, so, but on a local level too, I think if you can just build off of something that's gotten other interest.
And that's why it's so important to build off influencers. And I mean social media influencers. They have 15, 20 million followers, some of them in Africa. And yes, they're not all going to be angels, but you've got to find someone who has an interest in something and get them to advocate for you.
Yeah, well, it's interesting to tag off what Lisa said. I have a couple pangolin shirts from when I've done the wildlife conference in San Francisco, and I travel a lot, and so it's a comfortable shirt and I would wear it a lot, and so people would be like, what is that? And then I would explain. So I think even stuff like that, it's a smaller scale, but you know, people see something on a shirt and they're like, wait, what is that? Or like one of mine saved pangolins on the front and the other one has it on the back. And so they were just kind of like, well, what is that? And you explain it and they're like, oh, and you know, then you're like, well, it's the most highly trafficked animal, and you know, da 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 da. And they're like, I didn't know that. So I think even stuff like that, it's a smaller scale, but in just that individual, you know, person who, sorry, my cat is running around, crazy man, my younger one. So yeah,
and in fact, at one point, Google, I remember as a search engine, they ran an awareness on animals going extinct, and on the, you know, instead of pressing go on the browser, you clicked on the animal, and it also opened up a window of information about that animal.
Yeah, great. Yeah, and to go back to what Lisa said as well, like just piggybacking off anything that's happening. So, you know, like, and linking to what Holly said, if they're showing a football match or music, if it's a concert, you know, like getting someone up on the stage to talk, you know, that's an audience. You've got an audience there, and it's an audience of probably local people. Yeah. So a lot of the things we've talked about now have been kind of very public and very visible, you know, big ways of reaching people. But there are different approaches to advocacy and influencing people, and some stakeholders might respond better to different approaches. So if you have a kind of outspoken approach where you're giving public messaging at an event or radio, whatever it is, that's what you call loud advocacy. That could be getting articles in the news, getting you know, like it could be like maybe.
We actually have, sorry Isabelle, I interrupt you, we have a whole knowledge module coming up on exactly this, an approach to conservation, the media, and it's actually a guest speaker doing the whole module, so it's going to be fascinating.
Well, and I was just doing a conference this week, and one of the examples that I was really taken with, and I'm curious, Holly, you probably know about it, was in Kenya. This professor, they created like the great sort of census, and they made it into this huge like nationwide, kind of like a bio blitz in the US, where you try to get everyone together, and for a certain day period, you count as many zebras or whatever that you can, and then they share all the information. And so I guess it took off to where they had.
Let's have a chat about that later, because the corruption in that was unbelievable.
I would really like to hear about that. I would, because I heard the shiny.
Everything you've heard about it.
Okay, I would love to. I really would like to hear about that, because then he said they had a ball where they, brought people all dressed up, and it sounded like an interesting way. But yeah, I really want to hear the downside, because you only hear the upside.
Yeah, good. So so if you're doing loud advocacy, so very public facing advocacy, it could be kind of constructive, positive approach to like talking about the benefits or the successes, but it could also be naming and shaming. So if you notice behavior or an activity that's wrong, you could, message about it very publicly to say this group continues to do this and this is why they shouldn't, and so on.
That's one of the things they're trying to do in the Masai Mara with tourists who are refusing to obey rules, name and shame, so that they get put on the social media with photos of them in their vehicle with their driver guide.
Yeah, exactly. But then you could also be working in a context where it's more sensitive. So the government or key individuals might not be that receptive. Maybe they don't like to be publicly criticized. Maybe it's a sensitive or restrained operating environment. It could be in a conflict setting. It could be in a place where trust of internationals or of different ways of doing things is low, or perhaps where public trust in government is low. And in those kind of settings, you would perhaps take a slightly different approach. You might not want to splash across the news that this government official is doing this, because you might end up in prison or even worse. So in those cases, we would turn to quiet advocacy, and quiet advocacy is more where you take a kind of one-to-one type of approach. So you might be directly targeting the people who you think you can influence, and the people who have the power to change the way things are being done. So that might be through building coming back to the relationship building we talked about in the beginning, but using the relationships that you're building or continuing to build relationships so that you can have meetings with them, one-to-one meetings or smaller meetings. Could be also like letter writing, writing an official letter to explain something or to set up a meeting, and just it really comes back to like building relationships and building trust with people over time. So I used to work in Sudan, where at the time I was there, the government was very, well, basically a dictatorship. You guys may know about it. But we couldn't, there were some things we just couldn't say publicly. And there were some topics we couldn't write about, or some words we couldn't use. And in that setting, it was just really important to be able to know who you can talk to and who you have to get on board if you want to try and influence them. And it can be impossible. Like some things might be impossible, or they're very difficult to do at this point in time. But change can take place. It can be a long process, but that's not to say that you should. Obviously, that's not to say that you should give up, because if we give up, what's the point in any of it, right? What's the point in even caring about it?
Just send George Clooney in. That's what they did, and that's what he just went to the Sudan and did all sorts of specials with his dad.
Yeah, exactly.
No, I have a question. I mean, I assume you're probably getting to this, but I'm really curious about this app. Like, can you maybe give us, walk us through like an example of when it worked and maybe when it didn't? Because I'm just really, I have so many questions about it. And
yeah, of course.
Curious.
Yeah. So, okay. So the app's called Development Check, and it has 3 sections. One section is access to information. So that's where you upload any like project plans or other documents you've got hold of. One section is ask the community. So whatever you're monitoring, whether it's water infrastructure or whatever, you will be checking what the problems are and what's being done to fix them. but you would also want to speak to the community to say, okay, so there's this project going on. Do you know about it? Is it something that's going to benefit you? Is it needed in the first place? So that's one section of the app. And then the third section is problems and fixes. So that's where the problems are reported and that becomes displayed online. And that's also where if you over time get something fixed or get something changed, you would report it there. And then you would have what we call the fix rate. So the rate of problems that have been identified that have also been fixed. So let me just quickly show you a couple of things. Sorry, share my screen again. Not that, this one. Okay, so this is one example of how it's used. So it's used, can you see it?
Yes.
So it's used in schools. So we have what we call integrity clubs that are set up in schools, and they monitor how education is delivered. So they learn about integrity and honesty and behavior and stuff. But then they also monitor, for example, the facilities like the school building. Is it accessible to people with disabilities? Are the toilets working properly? Are they cleaned? Do you have separate toilets for girls and boys? Do teachers show up to teach? Do you have the books you need? Do you have desks or chairs or whatever? And then so they have integrity clubs, and then they monitor what's happening, and then they also work with like the teacher, the head teacher, or maybe there's like a school management committee, and they work with them to get the problems fixed. So one example of success that we had was in Afghanistan, where students were monitoring whether teachers were coming to school to teach or not. And they realized that sometimes teachers didn't show up. But then when the teachers realized that they were being monitored, they started showing up. So it was kind of reverse of what you might expect. It wasn't the teachers like controlling the kids, it was the kids were able to make sure the teachers were coming to teach. And there was an example in Nepal where the toilets were just really in a really bad state, and they were using the apps, they took pictures, and then so that if you are working in a project with us, you would have access to this app. You could also go in and explore what's happening in other countries, what's happening in other projects, what's being monitored, what are the problems that are being found. So the kids said to their teacher, hey, we've now taken a picture of this terrible toilet. And the teachers and the like colleagues in Kenya can see that. They can see the toilet in our school and how disgusting it is. And they solved it. They actually were able to get funding from the school, from the local authority to build proper toilets so that the kids, because having poor sanitation in schools could be a reason why kids, especially girls, don't come to school. In DR Congo, we had a school that didn't have separate toilets for girls and boys, and they were able to get funding for that, and then they built proper toilets and they were gender segregated, and then it improved girls' attendance. So yeah, those are some of the examples. And then the other one is infrastructure monitoring. So this is taking place in a few different countries as well. And for example, in Kenya, so they find out what infrastructure is planned, they get training on how to monitor it, they visit the construction site, they meet with the contractor, they meet with local officials, and they discuss problems and solutions. And for example, in one case, they were constructing a school, and they got the project plans, and then they went to the construction site and they saw that the contractors weren't digging the foundations deep enough, which meant that the building probably wouldn't last as long as it should. So they said to the construction workers, they said, you aren't following the project plans. You're not digging it deep enough because you want to save time and you want to save money, but that means you're not doing what you've signed a contract to do. And then they went and they redug the foundations and started construction on that. So and then in terms of challenges, I mean, you know, a lot of problems that get flagged, it takes time to fix them, or they get fixed and then they break again. You know, it's an ongoing process. It's not. And another thing that's really important is to engage really early in the process. So to engage with if it's a specific project, like a time-bound project, to start right towards the beginning, because if you start towards the end when most of it's done, you're not going to be able to have that much impact. And then just to look at the app briefly.
Can I just nip in, Isabelle? Is
Yeah.
that, you know, one of the things with these apps, and they really are so interesting where apps are playing a part. You've got to have someone on the other side of the app that's going to follow up, you know, if you take a photo or you message. So there is a group here that I've heard of who, like Isabelle just described with the school thing, but instead of having someone who is going to come and fix that problem, what they do is that app is available to all parents and potential parents, and they can get apps from all the schools. So the students are filling out things and sending photos, which affects whether parents want to send their kids to school. So it's in the interest of the school to be meeting this, because otherwise they're not going to get the students they need, because the parents are going to choose another school. So the parents are in effect monitoring the school. And if you could set something up with conservation where, if, you know, there's, let's say with poaching, and if there is this fewer number of snares found by the anti-poaching team, then the community gets you know, a zebra delivered as meat to the community every month. But if there's over that number of snares, then there's no delivery of the zebra. And that's monitored on the app by people taking photos of snares and handing it in to the community. So, you know, there's all these different ways to have someone on the other end of the app, and you have to be creative, and also you have to change it here and there, because people will get bored of the same thing and find ways around. So if you've got 1 month it's parents monitoring, another month it's something else, you know. So anyway.
Well, yeah, because that was my question too, is how much is your organization involved in managing all these projects, and how long is the commitment? Is it just through the course of a specific project?
Yeah,
I was just curious about how that works.
Yeah, so yeah, there is a fair amount of work that goes into managing the app, like the back end and development and bugs and everything. And the data also, like data cleaning, because people enter data and sometimes it's misleading or needs to be checked before it can be taken as correct. But the way it works is we partner with an organization locally, we get funding for a specific time period, and then the next step is to work with the community to choose the monitors. So then in that process, they also try to be inclusive. So if it's in a school, they would make sure there are boys and girls and students with disabilities who are involved. If it's in a broader community setting, they would want to get, again, gender balance, but older people, younger people, people with disabilities. And then it's the community who says what they want to monitor. So obviously in a school, it's a bit more limited to what you can monitor, and you have a set of questions from the beginning. But if it's in a community setting, it might be, okay, we want to monitor whether the water infrastructure is working properly. Or we know there's supposed to be a school built that 2 years later still hasn't been built. We want to monitor that. So the project timeline, the kind of project timeline in terms of our involvement and our funding is dependent on us having like an agreement with a local organization, but then what they're monitoring can change throughout that period of time. So yeah, there are like questions around sustainability and impact, obviously from that point of view, because it's, you know, you need the kind of support, you need the local organization to run it, and then you need to have some kind of agreement in place where there's funding to make it all happen. But I also think that so many elements of this approach, because I don't, like I said, we don't work in conservation, and we might one day, you know, but there are so many elements of the approach that we see work it's not only about the app, because in a lot of schools, kids aren't allowed to have a phone. So they do, like, that's what the slide, oh, sorry, it's still on slide, I forgot. This one, you can see the bottom photo there. They have like a scoreboard. And so then they have like attendance, cleanliness of facilities, teaching materials and so on. And they track that over time. And then this scoreboard is displayed in the school. So that everyone can see it. The teachers can see it, the parents can see it, anyone who comes to the school can see it. But yeah, so it's not all about the technology. Like the app helps, the app works, but so many elements of the approach are important in themselves. Basically, that's what I was trying to say. And this is just you can, and I'll share with you the link, or the link's there, developmenttech.org. If you go onto the developmenttech.org website, you can click on different countries, you can click on different projects, you can see what's being monitored, what problems have been found, what problems have been fixed, and then you can see the fix rate, and so on. So yeah, but I will go back to the thing we were talking about before, and I'll share with you all some links of what my organization is doing in the Development Check app, but also other links that I think might be useful after the session as well. Okay, so we were talking about advocacy, and then we got sidetracked a little bit, but that's fine. It's all important. Then the last thing I was going to talk, well, no, two last things. Sustainability is one, and then the next one is safety. And then I have a nice example to share with you. So with sustainability, you know, we have to think about the long term. It's a long-term process. Being engaged for a long time can be the only way to get things done, because it takes time to make change. And that's why kind of building awareness in the community, building trust, building relationships, and getting people involved and getting people to feel passionate about it is so important, because you as an individual or your organization might not be there for that long, but you can set something up that continues, like in the mindset of people might continue to care about conservation and the natural world after, well, we hope that they would continue to care about that after you leave, after you're out of the picture. You know, if the funding finishes, if the project finishes, if there's no staff anymore, will the effects of this project continue? And this is probably one of the hardest questions of all, but building the understanding and the awareness from the beginning, from that point of view, changing the mindset of people and the behavior of a group, so that their habits are less detrimental, are so important from the beginning. So anyone have any ideas on sustaining impact that they want to share, or questions, or, you know, challenges?
One of the good ways to sustain an impact is to enable mobility. So if you can ensure, or you take the most proactive 2 people of your community team. So you've gone in, you've started up a community-driven conservation initiative. And when we say community-driven, that's what I mean, not outside entity-driven. You've come in, you've started it up, you've sort of got going, but it's now community-driven. It is important for those people to be inspiration to other groups. So as long as, if you can't maintain your presence there, but you can at least ensure some sort of mobility income, so you can allow the most proactive people to travel and set up projects or give inspiration to other community groups, but they have to come back to their community. You know, that's one way to sustain impact, because they'll go and find ideas and come back, and go and find ideas and come back. And yes, you don't want it always to be the same person. So if you have this system where people can look forward to being the one with mobility passes that year, you're going to keep that community project going, because they want to be able to travel on someone else's money. But again, do we keep giving money? And that's where we were talking about the importance of volunteerism. And I don't have the answer. If you want to improve your community, you need to volunteer, because it's your livelihood.
Yeah, and just to pick up on something you said as well, Holly, on the fact that it has to be community-led, that's another key element of sustainability, because if you want the community to believe in it and care about it, they have to feel like they own it. So you can come in as an outside group and have a kind of framework or a idea in place, an idea that you want to put in place, but the community has to be able to lead it from the beginning and be involved in it and understand it and feel like it's theirs, like community ownership. So they have to feel like they're checking or monitoring or working on an area of conservation that they want to. And in any given setting, that could be different things, but you can, in the beginning, you can allow them to choose what they want to monitor, and you can try and make sure they're also monitoring something where they are likely to see impact, where there's likely to be change, so that they get that kind of passion and inspiration and boost from the beginning. And then what you said about other communities hearing about it and being interested, I think that's also really interesting thing to bear in mind. So if this approach works in one setting and you get good results, that comes back to the advocacy and the local awareness raising. So if you can make the results known on a broader level, it could be scaled up, because other communities might say, hey, we used to have really
We
good.
used to burn all of our land all the time, and now
we don't. No, I was going to say we used to have loads of tourists coming because we had really interesting and beautiful wildlife to visit, and now we don't have tourists because we don't have that many animals, or we don't have whatever it was that was interesting people. But since that community over there has started this approach, their animals have started coming back, and now the tourists are coming back, and now the money is coming back. So can we do that in our village? Can we do that in our forest? So that's another reason why kind of sharing the impact and the outcomes can be really important.
And one of the things we mentioned, which in Africa, and I know that the first world is steering away from competition because everybody's a winner, but they're not, right? So, I kind of feel competition in Africa is still a very big thing, even in our schools. And okay, it's not the right way every single time, but I reckon 60% of the time, competition makes people get things done.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
And when the funding ends, do they have access? Do you guys still service the app on the back end for as long as they want to use it?
Yeah, so that's different in different cases, but in some cases we're able to give access to the app for longer if there's like the structure and the funding in place. But in some cases they know from the beginning that the app is going to be there for the lifetime of the project. And so embedded in the project and towards the end, there is an element of this like sustainability and thinking about how can we apply these things after the project ends. And in fact, in some cases, we've seen that an element of the approach has been incorporated into the local kind of the local like laws, right? So I need to try and be a bit more specific about this, but we have seen in Nepal with our partners there, they've been able to lobby the government to include a chapter on integrity and integrity in schools in the curriculum that is now national. And our partners are working in like 2 areas in Nepal, but from now on, the integrity is going to be part of the curriculum for kids. So fine, the app might not be available for monitoring in all contexts, but the approach and the idea behind it and the idea of integrity and the idea of being able to make sure the school is being run in the right way, that's going to continue because that's going to be taught as part of the curriculum. And then we have like a toolkit on integrity, setting up integrity clubs, which is also on our website. You guys can see that, which anyone can use, right? You don't need the app to use it. You don't need our support or our like a project to use it. You can take it and apply it in your own context. Yeah. Great. Okay, so we're getting towards the end, but I wanted to talk briefly about safety because that's really important and it's come up already today. So reporting corrupt behaviour and whistleblowing can be dangerous, and there could be individuals or groups who stand in the way because they're scared to lose power or funds, because if they stop doing the things the way they're doing, they're not going to have access to whatever it is that they're getting by unfair means. So again, this comes back to the point I've made a couple of times, that it's so important to get everyone included from the beginning in the community engagement. But there may always be people who are kind of less supportive, or even like potentially dangerous. And approaching people like that is obviously really, you have to be really cautious. So any ideas on mitigating or managing risk when it comes to this kind of work?
Well, I think, what's important in the beginning, when you're starting to kind of put your plan in place, is to learn about what actually usually happens in those areas, or what has happened in the past, because then you're starting to research, and then you're able to, if you find out or you have some ideas at the beginning, you can try to figure out how you can mitigate that risk. So I think it's important to start right away, to have that as part of your plan, because if you forget it and then you move on and then something happens, you're not really prepared for it. And so, maybe there's an area where there's a lot of poaching, and there's not an anti-poaching unit. So you think about that, like, okay, what would it take to get something like that into place, or, kind of something along those lines.
Definitely, yeah. Thinking about what might be needed in your context to make it safer. Yeah.
Anonymity is always important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, anonymity. Yeah, and also making sure that there's a mechanism in place for people to report if they feel threatened, or if an incident takes place, and like you say, that they could report anonymously.
And I mean, you can have, these incident report centers, and then you set them up, but you say to the community, these are for everything. So this is an incident report if a bush pig eats all your crop, if a leopard takes your livestock, if somebody threatens you, if. So that incident report center covers all aspects of your community. If the water has failed in an area. In fact, I was just listening to a program yesterday where they've created these bridges for slow lorises, but they've done it with really high quality irrigation piping, which means that the farmers want to keep that piping intact because it really supports them, which gives the slow lorises the habitat connectivity that they need. So they have an app to incident report when the irrigation pipeline goes down, because it's affecting their livelihood. But actually the whole point of it as well is to say where the slow lorises might get taken.
If you're setting up an incident report center like that, you have to think really carefully about expectations and follow up, because if people think they report anything and it's going to get fixed, that's, you have to really manage expectations, because you will obviously have your area of focus. So, and if people are reporting things and nothing's changing, then they'll stop reporting.
No, you're quite right. But now we actually talked about, don't create expectations that you can't meet.
Yeah. And if you have incident or like a mechanism in place to report threats or incidents in terms of like personal safety, you, like Holly said, you can have it, or I can't remember who said it could be anonymized, but also there should be a focal person to kind of investigate and handle such issues. So there has to be a person that everyone can trust to take care of it, because the person reporting it might need to give more information after the actual report. So then you need to kind of have that one-to-one.
But Isabelle, how do you deal with vendettas that are used, they're fought in this way? So I certainly saw it definitely once in the groups that are you know, from World Bank sponsored spraying the locusts in northern Kenya and Somaliland. And the women from Somaliland, it is actually a cultural thing with aid organizations. If the women don't like the person they're working under, they make a complaint of sexual harassment. And then it is policy that that aid worker has to be removed from their job. And there were 2 people removed who, I mean, I would be very surprised if they did actually harass. It is literally the way people deal with getting the right boss that they want.
Yeah, I mean, you have to have a process for investigating it, basically. So, yeah, it's, yeah, you know, things can be misreported. And if things are reported, you also, the way we handle it is you call it an alleged incident until you've been able to reassure yourself that it actually took place. You see what I mean?
So your wording in these things is critically important.
Yeah, exactly. And then when it comes to safety and reporting, and Maya, do you want to say something?
That's just what I meant in the beginning. There can be false. I don't know how to express it.
False reports.
Yeah, false reports.
Yeah, definitely. There has to be a kind of system in place to investigate and to see what really, to try and understand to the best of your ability what really happened by speaking to different people. And then the other thing I was going to say was, if you do end up working in a setting where you're kind of using the monitoring approach, so having community or citizen monitors, we always encourage that monitoring takes place in pairs. So you wouldn't be traveling or going by yourself to monitor whatever it is you're monitoring, you know, animals or trees or whatever. Or the implementation of rules. So there's always 2 people, so you're less vulnerable and less exposed by going by yourself. And also that monitoring takes place at a time of day when people can safely get back home before dark, because obviously especially closer to the equator, like it gets dark very quickly and there might not be much lighting and it might be hard to get back before you feel unsafe to be traveling around, things like that. So just a few things to think about.
One more thing, Isabelle, which I think Maya links to what you were also saying, is that in any one of these things, we obviously come in often as an outside entity speaking, you know, in West Africa, French, in East Africa, English, and Southern Africa, it could be Afrikaans, English, or Portuguese, and in North Africa, Arabic. And you might have, like in Kenya, for example, Kiswahili is the national language, but not every tribe speaks Swahili. And certainly you'll go to places where they won't understand a word of what you're saying. So if that is where your community-driven conservation initiative is, you need to make sure that what you're saying and the message you want to give is being received in the way that you intend it, which means you need to be working with local translators. And we already said, like, the definition of the word conservation doesn't even exist in most languages. So if you're going to put a message across, you need to be working with translators who make sure that the message you're giving is what you want, because you know, you might say something that's translated and then they're expecting a tractor to arrive for their farming. And you're like, well, I never said there was going to be a tractor. And they say, well, this says there's farming implements. Tractor.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, and literacy as well. Is that an issue at all with some of the more citizen monitors?
Yeah, definitely. Exactly. So if people have low literacy, it can be a barrier. So for example, with monitoring, we would always make sure that if monitoring is taking place in pairs, that at least one of people is a little bit more tech savvy if they're using the app, or is able to read if they have to check their project documentation, or that
carry on, Isabelle, sorry.
No, or that the project team can support them to understand what's being promised. Yeah.
Another thing that's really a growing profession or job slot is the ability to translate all of these policies and ideas into art, so into drawings, sort of these strip cartoons, you know, that they can fill a book with strip cartoons that basically say, you know, don't dump your sewage in the river here because this causes an algal bloom which gives you cholera. Now, it's all very well to say that in bullet points in English or the native language, but actually 90% of the people might not understand that. So these strip cartoons and then painting them on walls and painting them across police stations and schools, it is really important. So
having sessions where you explain. Yeah.
And if you have a member of the community who's good at art, who can draw those sort of strip cartoons really quickly, you know, that is a way to get them involved, because they will see their art across walls and they will pass that message on. It is really a place that's growing.
Yeah.
And for an example there, Uganda Wildlife Authority is using these strip cartoons in Queen Elizabeth National Park to deal with sewage in the water systems, but also poisoning of lions.
Yeah. Good. I'm going to say that we should wrap up soon because it's almost the end. And I just wanted to share with you a quote from one of our projects, which does link more closely to natural resources, because I thought that might be interesting. So I'm going to send it on the chat because it's quite long. Let me just send it. But this gives an example of how, just how our monitoring has been able to.
But Isabelle, read it out for us so we can
I'll read it out. In Tanzania, monitors were engaged in a sustainable charcoal project. There was a conflict between charcoal producers and cattle keepers in the village. Community monitors identified this while conducting their monitoring visit. As part of the joint working group, I was able to raise awareness of bylaws that help to guide proper use of land and forest. We, the joint working group, agreed that these laws should be adhered to in the community and agreed to put up a sign that alerts everyone to stop taking their cattle into the forest area, which is what was leading to the conflict. And up until now, everyone is following the bylaws and practicing proper land use. So that was an immense success for us. So this is just an example of how raising awareness of what the bylaws are about land use can contribute to making sure that land is used in the right way and that cattle weren't going into the forest where they might basically eat or trample like the natural habitat that's supposed to be protected, and the land is not supposed to be used in that way. So just to wrap up, thank you everyone for being so active and for bringing your examples and sharing your questions. And I hope it's been interesting. It's a big job. There's a lot to be done. It takes time. Patience is important, but we can make a difference. And I just wanted to say that I'll be very happy to talk to any of you afterwards. So Holly, please share my contact details.
You want to just put your email in the chat site?
Yeah, but I wanted to share my notes as well. In case
yes, I can load them onto the platform. So email them to me and I'll load them up.
Yeah, and then I've also added a couple of links about my organisation and some other links just about kind of community-centred conservation and governance and anti-corruption that I was looking at before we spoke today that might be interesting to everyone. But yeah, thank you everyone. Really nice to meet you all.